Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our monthly webinar series. We are a team at NIMHANS working for Center for Violence Against Women and Mental Health, a Government of Karnataka initiative aimed at addressing mental health challenges in women affected by violence. The theme of November month's webinar is Engaging Men in the Fight Against Gender-Based Violence, Understanding Why Men May Be Violent. November 25th being the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, today's webinar commemorates with the theme Unite, Invest to Prevent Violence Against Women and Girls. This theme underscores the need for collective action and the allocation of resources to create safe environment, mental health support, and educate for a cultural shift towards equality and respect. As we begin this webinar, we will explore the various dimensions of engaging men in the fight against gender-based violence and discuss its significance and deliberate on actionable strategies that can bring about tangible change. I am honored to introduce today's speaker to you all. We are privileged today to have We are privileged today to have Dr. E. Arvind Raj, Additional Professor of Psychiatry Social Work at NIMHANS Bengaluru, with us. With a PhD in Psychiatric Social Work from the very same prestigious institution, Sir has been enriching the field with his expertise. His role as a visiting faculty extends to several renowned institutions, including Ranchi Institute of Neuropsychiatry and Allied Sciences, the Department of Psychiatry at Kasturba Medical College, and the Indian Institute of Management in Rohtak. Sir is not only at the forefront of academic and clinical excellence, leading nearly 19 projects as principal investigator, but he is also a seasoned educator with vast teaching experience. As a resource person and faculty for government and non-governmental organizations, he has made significant contributions to the field, authorizing closely to 109 in total books, research report, journal articles, logs, etc. His insights and experiences are invaluable, especially in discussions centered around the intersection of social work and mental health. Happy to welcome you, sir. On to you, sir.
Thank you, Grishma, for that introduction. Good evening, on and all. And this happens to be a month of World Men's Day as well, like November 19th, we are celebrating that. So I think with all the other special day, this also would be the right thing for us to have this particular webinar on this particular day. Without wasting much time, let me get into the presentation. So as it was given in the topic,
Sir, PPT.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
It's seen, yes. Right? Yeah, okay, right, thank you. So we will try to understand what are the reasons why men get into violence, and then what are the ways we are trying, to help them out to find out the positive coping strategies. So these are some of the things which we would be focusing in today's presentation. At the end of the presentation, feel free to have your doubts and clarification. And to begin with, let's just see what exactly is violence itself. Many a times violence, we feel that it is just towards others, not necessarily as per the WHO's definition. It mainly focuses on the intentionality. Even the harming oneself is part of violence. It is either physical force or power, threat, or even actual against oneself or another person, which results in injury, death, psychological harm, as well as maldevelopment or deprivation. So it's not necessarily one type of violence, and also not just actually directed towards others. It can be to oneself as well. And also James in 1997 in one of the article has spoken about how actually the violence is just not a tragedy for the victims. It is also for the victimizers who can also be called as perpetrators. And that exactly is one reason why we also need to give equal focus on the victimizer or the perpetrators, rather than we looking at it from a moral dimension or a legal dimension. Yes, of course, legal dimension is very important, but just the legal dimension alone would not help the victimizers to change the way they look at the violence per se. So a little more on that has to be done. So even in the whole overall holistic concept of violence, the victimizers or the focus on victimizer is also important. Similar to that violence, the component of the violence is that gender-based violence, which is primarily, focused on the other gender, and mostly it is, female gender. And it need not be always sexual, and it can be physical, verbal, psychological, and economic violence. So when we talk about economic violence compared to the previous definition of violence, when what they spoke about in terms of deprivation, where I'm not allowed to go for a job or not given that economic independence, psychologically putting down and verbally trying to use harsh words, physically being abusive, as well as sexually being abusive. Everything forms gender-based violence, and it includes harassment and exploitation. Also, issues like honor killing, female genital mutilation, as well as trafficking, rape, femicide, and child marriage. All these things are part of gender-based violence. And many a times it happens at home, in the known environment, or in public, as well as at workplaces. And most of the time, females are the primary victims of gender-based violence, even though there are in some instances, male are victims of gender-based violence. Majority of the victims are the female gender. And that is one reason why we also need to focus on women when we talk about gender-based violence. That does not mean that we should not focus on men, but as the topic goes, here it's about to understand the role of men in violence against women. In that context, we would try to see what are some of the reasons and the theories behind why men are violent towards the opposite gender. If you see the statistics, the National Crime Records Bureau very well talks about what is the percentage of domestic violence. 31.2% of women who are part of the survey reported domestic violence. And also in India, a total of 28,000 and odd cases were reported in a given year about the violence. And even 38% of the murder of women is committed by their intimate partners, which very well justifies most of the gender-based violence happens at home. And you can also see here the statistics which was quoted by the paper by Rathore in 2023. It talks about the number of rapes in a given year, that is the previous year, 2022, and what are the deaths related to the rape as well as the insults. So this is something why the justification why we need to focus on violence against women in the context of understanding the reasons for violence against women. So when we talk about the reasons, yes, the most important thing is trying to understand it from theory point of view. As we all know, the social learning theory by Albert Bandura, it talks about how a person gets modeled by seeing the social environment. As you rightly see here in the picture, the any human's behavior, whether it is a positive behavior, healthy behavior, unhealthy behavior, negative behavior, every behavior in terms of skill, practice, efficacy, it just not depends on the cognitive factors which they gain through the environmental factors, the kind of society they live in, the kind of access they have, the influence of the family member, the larger society. So that actually influences the cognitive factor, which leads to the behavioral patterns. We can see as part of that, as part of social learning theory, it is understood that, in many of the households where the children grow up seeing or experiencing domestic violence, they may be the active victim of the domestic violence, or they may be a witness for the domestic violence, they are the one who are more likely to be involved in domestic violence themselves as adults. It may not be like they know that it has a right way of coping in that particular situation or the unhealthy way, but that's exactly is the model what they have seen, which makes them to repeat that as they become adults. So this is one way of looking why, men, especially in our cultural scenario where there is more of a patriarchal family system, where there are many times men are the heads of the family, they are the person who are the earning member. Most of the time they are the functional leaders. They tend to be violent towards the family members for various reasons, and that is being seen by children. And as they grow up, they completely feel that's the only way to deal with such situations. So this is one way of looking at the reason for violence against women by men. And also at the larger macro level, hegemonic masculinity theory, it talks about how a set of values which is established by men in power, which that functions to include and exclude and to organize society in gender unequal ways. When we talk about gender unequal ways, it is just not even between male and female. The hegemonic masculinity theory talks about how a powerful man tries to put other, the less powerful, even man, not even woman, less powerful man under them, tries to, overpower them, tries to rule them. And that's exactly it results in differential access, among men to power, and then the interplay between men's identity and the men's ideal interaction, power and patriarchy. So this is something which we need to be very mindful, because many a times the societal roles of gender, basically the male and female, is decided by this kind of perspective, where some, for example, men are supposed to do only these kind of hard work, women are supposed to be at home, or even unequal pay among men and women. And many of the leaders are men, and most of the soft jobs are being done by women. For example, if you can see, many nurses are women, and many truck drivers are men. All these things are not the biological perspective. In fact, anybody can do any work, except for some sexual characteristics or biological characteristics, like only women can give birth, women can feed the children. All the other aspects are being built based on these social perspective, where men take the using the power, they take the upper hand. So based on this social learning theory, to support the social learning theory and hegemonic masculinity theory, the UN agency has released a video which very clearly talks about, how this masculinity and how this gender inequality persists in the society. This is a 7-minute video. You go through it, just try to observe what are all the things which you can see as part of gender equality, and then we can go ahead with the other perspectives why men commit violence. So I'll just start this video.
Sir, does the video has a audio also? Not able to hear the audio.
Can you hear the audio?
No, sir.
1 minute, just a minute. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Is it audible?
Not yet, sir.
Oh my God.
Ah,
Is it audible?
yes, very little.
Okay. I'm just trying to increase the volume. Anyway, the content is important. Let's
Okay.
just see through that.
Okay.
I'm sure you would have observed the following things, a kind of what is the influence of the patriarchal society, and the non-sharing of the responsibilities, the gender-specific roles starting at home, where this person do not do any sort of activities, household chores, where women is involved in household chores as well as working outside, and even when at the workplace, the kind of work what women are given and what kind of supervisory work men are given, and the kind of work what they are doing, and then the pay for that. Though the work done by the women are more, there is an unequal pay, as well as the multiplicity of roles what the mother is doing. And then you can also see the faulty modeling. That's the before the dream, whatever is actually happening, that was the faulty modeling for the children, where you can see even the male child over there do not help their mother or do not get into any of the household chores, whereas the female children are getting into some work. And that actually talks about the previous two theories what we were discussing. In a nutshell, it has brought out things nicely. Whatever the dream part, we will discuss little later when we talk about the intervention per se. The other one more important theory, especially in the context of current the just the recent past COVID crisis, is that the strain theory. Many a times, because of the negative emotions, which includes frustration, irritation, anger, due to various reasons. The reasons could be anything, something like the financial crisis or the pandemic. There are a lot of studies in Indian context as well as abroad, Western countries. Following COVID lockdown, there were so many domestic violence reported, which means there will be hundreds which went unreported. And the reasons behind that were basically the unemployment and lack of financial resources that led to negative emotions, frustration and anger, do not know how to cope with that situations in a positive way. That's exactly what actually gets converted into the violence in many forms. Not necessarily physical violence, it could be psychological violence, it could be economic violence. So this is also one way. This also helps us to understand what exactly is the source of the violence. It's just not the men, it is also the reasons behind that, and then helping men to manage those situations in a positive way. It really helps. And in the later part of the presentation, let me share some of our experiences, what we are working with different group of men, which will justify the point what I'm trying to say now. The other one is in larger macro level, the social disorganization theory. You can see the social disorganization, which suggests that violence and aggression cluster in neighborhoods characterized by poverty, residential instability, and racial or ethnic diversity. You can also relate it with the ecological, socio-ecological perspective. You can see at the individual level what are all the issues happening because of the social disorganization. At the relational level, stigma, marital conflict, and at the community level, explicit community support of violence against women and girls, inequitable gender norms and practices, low socioeconomic status, and at the societal level, discriminatory laws and practices, too little political will to implement law and policy, and then male entitlements in majority of the things, acceptance of violence as a conflict resolution mechanism. Again, you need to relate it with the hegemonic masculinity theory, where it is okay for men to, indulge in violence because that is considered manly. But when that is being approved at the societal level, it even becomes much more easier for them to take this route to, to handle the psychological distress and reactions what they face because of other social reasons. So here we need to understand what exactly is the cause, and then what are all the factors we need to address at the micro level, which mean to say individual and family level, as well as at the macro level, that is at the community level. Now, by seeing these are not the exhaustive list of theories, but these are the main theories which talks about why actually a gender, that is men of one type of gender, causes violence towards the other type of gender, that is females. So based on these theories, we can say that the causes of gender-based violence could be the childhood traumatic events for the men themselves, and then, as per the theory, the attitude towards the gender roles. Not sharing the responsibility would not be even looked as something wrong by the men when they have the wrong attitude. And similarly, substance abuse and violence always coexist. Lack of knowledge, because so many men who report who was reported to have committed violence, they have denied that they have committed this because they are not even aware this is part of violence. Putting down the spouse in front of others, not appreciating. In fact, these are all the forms of different types of violence which are they are not even aware of it. And then because of the gender roles, they are avoiding responsibility for the crime. For example, women are not supposed to dress this way because they have dressed this way, and that has made this particular male to rape that particular person. So that's the kind of attitude. And then the poor coping skills, as I said, many a times because of this gender attitude and gender roles in the society, many of the reactions to stress, for especially for men, are to do with substance dependence, increased smoking, restlessness, irritability. If it comes to the emotional part, it is more of aggression. Even in terms of interpersonal level, it is to do with aggression. Most of these things are all externalizing reactions, which are actually socially approved, which is not right, but socially approved. So they consider that as the only way to manage or to manage that particular situation. But unfortunately, it ends up in violence, either to self. In fact, suicidal attempts, if you see, that is more found among men. That is the suicide, committing of suicide. It is found more among men. And that is also one way of showing aggression towards self, which is also part of violence. And then, of course, the gender-based violence towards spouse and other female gender in the family or at the workplace. And sometimes the other issues like interpersonal aggressions and traits of antisocial personality, where men do not have or has less self-control of managing the emotions. Excessive use of pornography even leads to sexual abuse, as well as sometimes, of course, the mental illness because of the symptomatic or because of the symptoms of delusion of persecution or delusion of infidelity. People tend to be violent towards their spouses. So these are some of the causes, which also tells us it's just not enough to address this gender-based violence from a legal point of view. We also need to address things at these levels. Unless we change these things, which are the sources of gender-based violence, we would not be able to stop gender-based violence just with the help of with the legal help. So these are some of the areas which we need to address. And some of the papers which I had gone through talks about what are the perspectives of the perpetrators. Generally, the victim connect the event with their past and think about the future consequences, and the loss is more, and the event is mostly unexpected. And whereas from the perpetrator's point of view, it remains as a closed event. That event started, finished there. and then the loss is, perceived as a comparatively lesser loss. Though it is an impulsive, most of the time they blame the situation or the victim. As I was telling the way they had dressed up, the way they behaved made me to do so. But if you see, all these things are, again, as I was telling you, it is based on the attitudes developed, beliefs, and the behavioral tendency, which again I would put back on the environmental factors per se. So again, that is one of the causative factor which has to be corrected. And some of the studies, and one study by Scully in 1988, which talks about what would be the perpetrator's view on how victims would have perceived them, which is more like a reflective role taking. Many of them, describe themselves as violent. Like, the victims would have perceived me as a violent. Some of them has said that, they might have perceived me as kind and gentle. And then what about the feelings of the perpetrators immediately after the encounter? Many of them were scared of their own well-being, and so 27% of the convicts who admitted that yes, they committed that crime of rape, they also had shame and guilt. Some of the persons verbatins, like, it just blew past. I played basketball and went to my girl's house and had sex with her. I was not worried, or I didn't feel sorry about it. So this is the kind of perspective what they have about themselves, as well as what victims would have thought about them. And when it comes to the reflection of about their own perspectives of how the victim reacted during the incident, around 20% said that they did not care, and 46% of them stated that victims had emotions connected with powerlessness. This also talks about how we need to work with those victims. Of course, that's not the topic for discussion today, but how do we empower the other gender? And also see the verbatins. I think she felt dirty, cheap, or powerless. I assumed she felt degraded, angry, and used. The parts of her body that I touched felt dirty, and that was just what I wanted. So this is something which how they perceived, that is the perpetrators perceived how victims would have reacted. And then the perpetrator's view on the incident, 68% of the deniers meaning to say they did not take the responsibility, giving excuses of the situation itself, reported that the girls were initially willing and enthusiastic. This is again part of that, giving excuses for what has happened. And what about the empathy towards the victim? That is the perpetrator's empathy towards the victim. Majority of the admitters and deniers mentioned they did not care about what others felt. I don't think I had any worry or feelings for her. At that time, I think it was something I had wanted to do, and I was getting around to doing it. I had no feelings at all. She was like an object. So this also talks about how we need to even, prevent and promote well-being and positive mental health, rather than making something to happen and then trying to change, which becomes highly impossible given the hierarchical gender relations, patriarchal values, and gender imbalance in the power. We would not be, rather than saying impossible, we would even say that it is quite difficult to change the already developed personality or something like that. So the focus should be more towards prevention as such. And to do with what are the roles of laws in gender-based violence, many a times, I would give some examples later. Generally, those who are perpetrators, they are actually lacking awareness of all these laws, whether they are willingly abstaining or not. Sometimes laws helps them, awareness of laws helps them to abstain themselves from indulging in such acts. And then sometimes the other side, there is a misuse of legal provisions. Due to the availability of laws, individuals tend to raise false complaints under legislation related to gender-based violence. In fact, as an outcome of this, loophole, there are other organizations which are meant for men, which has come up, and also crime as a result of, as a second point, in fact, many a times POXO is being misused by the family members. For example, two adolescent children, boy and girl, when they are in relationship, sometimes in order to cut down the relationship from the girl's side, they use this POXO Act to put the adolescent boy into the observation home, or boys of 18 to 20 years into the prison. So that is some way it is being misused. As well as, because of this, what happens as they enter the prison, they, because of the wrong coping pattern, they always have the vengeance, and many a times they go back, does the actual crime, and again come back, which talks about, the, the residual effect of what is happening. So that also has to be. And then within that prison, or within the observation, they form the groups, in the prison, and might engage in rebellious or violent behavior. So that is also a possibility, which also we need to understand. Now, what exactly can be done in as part of prevention of gender-based violence? We need to do at individual level. For example, when we saw the video, the second part, that dream per se, unless the individual realizes and change, or brings the change at the family level. When we talk about family level, how they can engage, how they can share the family responsibilities. What is the kind of awareness given at the family level, and then at the larger level, community, how men come together and stand for the support of women. There is a UN Women Organization. They have published a series of booklets, which is called as He for She, that talks about what can be done by men at the community level, at workplace, at school, all these aspects which can be done. And again, whom to intervene based on that perspective. It can be victim-oriented intervention, which is very, very important, but it should not, the gender-based prevention of gender-based violence should not stop at that level. In fact, it has to also look at the other side, who are the victimizer or who are the perpetrator. The perpetrator-oriented intervention is also very, very important to prevent the residual, kind of crimes which are happening through the perpetrators. And on these models, why prevention is very important and why we need to involve young boys and girls. Educating and working with young boys and girls to promote respectful relationships and gender equality, which is very, very important. Because I went to a very prestigious institution yesterday afternoon. Even there, when I was talking about men's mental health, even there, when there were some women and girls who were there part of it, this men and the boys' attitude was, what are women doing in men's mental health program? It should not be so. In fact, it should be known the other way. Like, men and boys should know about women's and girls' mental health, and girls and women should know about men's and boys' mental health. That is how will help them to understand things. What are all the gender oriented? What are all the sex oriented? Which means biological oriented, social oriented. It's easy for them to have a different perspective in the formulation stage only. So that is why we need to focus on boys and girls. And it also leads to faster, sustained progress of preventing and stopping gender-based violence. That is all. Again, when we talk about prevention at different levels, and then which is often overlooked by public policies, this stage of life is critical when values and norms around gender equality are forged. Because we all know, like, as we learn the language at the early stage, it's easier. Similarly, something like language, these kind of attitude beliefs, when it is set in the childhood, that is very easy for them to sustain it. And unfortunately, due to various negative psychosocial factors, some children end up becoming perpetrators of violence. And even here, we cannot blame the children per se. As we talk about the disorganization theory, the whole of this micro and macro level social system is also equally responsible for the child to become a perpetrator, who in some point of time would also become an adult perpetrator. So that is something which we need to see. So, however, sensitizing these children on gender equality definitely would help reduce repeat of such violence by these perpetrators. And what can be done at the larger level, at the promotive level and preventive level? What we are doing as part of Bangalore Safe City project, we are doing something like school-based gender, sexuality, and personal safety sensitization program in government-run schools. Topics such as sex and gender, gender and power, good health, safety and abuse, handling relationships. These are all the issues which are covered for both boys and girls. And the teachers and sometimes the parents are also sensitized on these issues. And it's so surprising that many children, both male and female, they were reporting of sexual abuse for them immediately after these sessions. That is something, when they are aware as a victim, they can prevent themselves from the future such events. And when some people who are victimized or perpetrators are aware that what they are doing is a form of abuse, it gives them an opportunity not to do such things in the future. So that is something which we are trying to do at the school level. And one more aspect, as I was telling you, because of the false acquisitions, some of these men, where there is no legal option for them, they've all come together across the India. They've formed an organization called the Save Indian Family Federation. SIF it is called as. Even in Bangalore, we have an office. So this works for the cause of rights of men who are facing legal actions from their spouses, false acquisitions in terms of harassment, because of which, lack of child custody, which they feel is framed against them. So initially, when we were working with these men, again, as it was discussed, there's a lot of anger, agitation, that rebellious mood. I need to take revenge. And then once slowly, when we included them as part of our well-being volunteer program, they were able to, understand why actually they're angry, which is just an outcome reaction. And then what are the reasons for that anger? Let me work on it. So they were able to, regulate their emotions, so that the coping mechanisms, what they used, was positive. After the training program, it did not stop there. They went on and sensitized their own organization, men who are in distress because of these kind of false acquisitions. And they now are very clear in including mental health of men as part of their yearly conferences, where there will be a topic on men's mental health, where they are calling experts from different places, and they are making the other men to get that opportunity to know about themselves, both physically and psychologically. This is one thing which can be done, which helps in preventing the reoccurrences of violence against women. The other one is involving the perpetrators themselves, who are convicts or those who are under trials. Because the most important pillar of gender-based prevention of gender-based violence are the awareness about the consequences in general public, like what we do for school children, and then prosecution of perpetrators. Definitely it has to be done. And then we also need to talk about timely help and support to the victims, which is again very important. Equally important is the perpetrator. Suppose if we do not sensitize these perpetrators, how much ever we do the other three things, there are more chances for the reoccurrences. Once when the reoccurrences are there, more affected would be not just the victims, but also the perpetrators, both psychologically and physically, as well as socially. So that's the reason, as part of NIMAN's Karnataka collaborative project, as part of Safe City project, we have covered some of the children in observation home who have been brought to observation home under POCSO Act and special homes, as well as inmates of central prison. Somewhere around children, around 100 children, and then inmates around 800 inmates we are covering, where we are again there talking about gender roles, gender and power, harmonizing person and family life, dealing with stress, substance abuse, and mental illness. We are also bringing in some peer leaders within those convicted prisoners. In fact, they are very happy to be part of it. And set of assessments we did before starting this intervention program, it very clearly said what were their attitude towards women. Majority of them said men are more powerful. And then many of them said, as I am married, I do not have to take my wife's permission. And given a scenario when they were asked, I am not ready to send my sister or girlfriend outside the house, When girls walk alone on the road, I have taken them and sexually abused them. So the same might happen to my sisters by someone else. Same kind of scenario when it is given in the other study which I quoted in the previous slides. There they were saying, if in such scenario, I might go and kill that person who had abused my spouse or the child or the sister or sibling. You see what they do, and when it comes to their own family members, they again trying to show the aggression. So these were the attitudes even before the training program, and we were so surprised to see the kind of feedbacks immediately after the training program. We need to understand ourselves. We should change after going out. How to take care of women at home and others. I have understood. After attending the program, I started to think about how to lead a life. All these days, I was idle in the prison. Many a times, their worry is, when I go out, how do I face the society? How do people look at me? That is something which was expressed as the part of the outcome of the training program. I learned how to deal with stress, substance use, and other things, and I will follow them. Once I go out, I'll try to follow everything I learn. And as a peer leader, he was saying, I got a better understanding of gender-based violence causes and its impact on both victims and perpetrators' families. I am confident to conduct those sessions. This also will enable the sustainability of the programs in the prison. So these are some of the positive feedbacks what we received from the prison inmates who had been convicted or who are under trial because of gender-based violence. This gives us some sort of positive hope in how we can manage, the interventions for the perpetrators per se. So when we talk about the training, it can be in the general public, to the people who are distressed because of these things, as well as people who are convicted under the hands of the law. So all these places, it is possible to provide intervention for man, which reduces or which prevents gender-based violence per se. To conclude, yes, understanding the causes of gender-based violence from men's perspective, it leads to an holistic approach in the prevention of gender-based violence. And then both genders, involving them in prevention helps for better outcome. And such interventions and then the activities, it creates a sustainable positive change, not just at the individual level, but also at the family and, of course, at the larger level, community level. So by saying this, I will conclude my talk. These are some of the references. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. We will move on to the question and answer session now. So we request the participants to type your questions in the question and answer box and also in the chat box. So meanwhile, sir, we would like to discuss with you. So these,
Yes.
often we see that the influence of mass media, especially
Yes.
movies, serials, and advertisements,
Yeah.
where most of the youths today are learning from here. And is this, as we are discussing today, why men may be violent? So what is the role of this in today's webinar?
Obviously media plays a very important role, but media, as the name goes, media is one medium. Like, it's not about that medium. That medium can be a media, it can be family, but it is all about the attitude. For example, a person who directs an advertisement where for washing powder, you can see women washing clothes, whereas for a two-wheeler advertisement, men trying to drive. Now slowly there are changes in these kind of things, and those are all made in a very mindful way. But such changes in those levels alone will not help. Such changes has to happen at the individual and family level, which we need to continuously work. Like, I remember the advertisement of Cadbury's 20 years back. This male cricketer will hit a sixer, and then his girlfriend will be coming inside. Now they have reversed the role, which also says, which is happening at the media level, but I would not agree that it percolates down. Many a times, positive things, it is taking time to percolate down. Negative things, it goes easily. So we need to keep, talking about it, what exactly is gender equality, so that at different levels, at different mediums, media is one medium, through these kind of webinars, seminars, and then, in fact, men all coming together and talking about it at workplace, all those things really matters.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
We have a question here. So before that, there's another thing that we wanted you to highlight upon. This
Yeah.
emotional abuse is very less spoken about. When there is a violence, gender-based violence, when they speak, only the physical violence comes or sexual violence gets highlighted. So would you please throw a light on this emotional violence to our participants, sir?
Yes. For example, there is something called as visibility and invisibility. Some of these violences, what you spoke about in terms of sexual abuse and physical abuse, is very much visible. Whereas the economic, psychological, and emotional abuse, which is not very visible, and many a times the perpetrators may not even know it is a psychological or emotional abuse. For example, just telling the spouse, you don't know anything, you keep quiet. As a woman, why are you talking about it? These are some of the practical things what they say without even knowing that is a psychological abuse. So what I would say is, like, we need to spread that awareness. What are all the different levels and types of abuses? Because as I was telling, even in the prison project, what they were saying is, if we are aware that these are all parts of violence, probably we would have, we wouldn't have done it, or we are at least aware of the acts, and then these types, we wouldn't have done it. And if we are aware of how to manage that anger in a positive way, we wouldn't have got into this. So something like that, we also need to teach them. Possible many a times emotional abuse is basically negative way of managing their own stressful situation. So we will also teach the men about positive coping strategies, which will lead to reduction in those invisible abuses. Invisible abuses are these emotional, psychological, and economic abuses.
So there's a question from Afrin Banu Kadirnavar.
Yes.
If men are perpetrators, will they understand the need for their involvement in reducing violent behavior and keeping the family violence free? Or is this still considered as men are not directly involved in the violence? The violence occurs when women do not meet up with the men's needs. Is it still challenging?
This is again, when women do not meet up with men's needs, again, it's more of a very masculine sort of thing. What are the needs of men is what something which has to be discussed. Not everything need to be the right thing. But the first thing is, yes, because of various situational reasons, they commit this violence. That doesn't mean that they will keep committing the violence. We need to give opportunity to the perpetrators to realize the causes of the violence, and are there any other ways to manage that particular situation. For example, even in terms of physical abuse, as I was telling, in COVID situation, because of job loss, because of lack of employment, I was frustrated. So I had no other way. And I thought only abusing my wife is the only way I can take out my anger. But if I am told how to manage that particular situation in a positive way, that will help to prevent the further abuse towards the victim. And then the second point, what she was talking about, not satisfying the needs, what exactly is the need is what is all about. Like, for example, even in terms of whatever I say, you need to do it. It's more of, the emotional and psychological sort of thing. But that may be my need. But it is not necessary that the other gender, that my spouse, need to do it.
Yes.
So that itself, as I was talking about those theoretical perspective, gender theories, that's the attitude I need to change. I would be thinking, like, she has to wash all the vessels. She has to take care of the children. Maybe that is what I look for, but that may not be the right. Feeling relaxed, she will also be happy. That kind of things has to be there.
Yes. So this part you have already addressed, but still
Yeah.
they have asked how to prevent violence against women at workplace. Is there any law related to the issue?
See, definitely there is a law, but I believe just law will not help. People manipulate laws sometimes. As I was telling you, the other side, the particular person wouldn't have made that or wouldn't have committed that violence, but using that law, as I was telling you, POXO or even prevention, what is the Dowry Prevention Act, using that, they're misusing it, but it doesn't mean that they don't do that kind of violence at all. More than that, how do I create awareness among men? How do I involve men? That is what is very important, which is more difficult. The more I create awareness, I am not antagonizing men. Otherwise, it will be like if I only bring laws, no, obviously men will be looked as an antagonist. And then they also will like, okay, I am like villain. Then they will try to, try to do things against. Rather, how can I include them? How they can spread that awareness? That is what is important. Workplace, yes, workplace abuse. There are committees which has to be formed. These are all as part of laws.
Yes.
But law alone will not work. The more my attitude is changed, better would be the workplace rather than just the legal system, which I already told you as you said. Yeah.
Yes. So with this last question, we will conclude today's session.
Yes.
So this again in your presentation you have put across again to reiterate, as we can see the National Family Health Survey, where the question was, is it justified if the lady doesn't obey the in-laws? Is it justified husband or anyone committing domestic violence on the lady? And most of the women themselves have said yes. So as you have already said, the men justifying, as today's webinar is about engaging men. So excuse for the violence or a reason or justification of the violence. So please throw a light on this and we will conclude the session.
See, that's exactly I said. Like I was in the other survey, what we did, men think men are more powerful than women, which is not right. But because of that attitude, whatever women tries to do more than men, they get very angry. Similarly here, obeying in-laws for what? Again, that is a question. That's a very subjective thing. For example, in-law says, in the current scenario, in-law says a woman not to go for work. Is that where I need to obey? That is again depending on what issues. Again, there obeying is okay, let us take it, but how that situation is dealt by the spouse, that is the husband and wife, how that situation is negotiated between these two. Or is it only anger, frustration, and aggression, or it is talk and negotiation? That talks of the positive coping strategy. Situation may be there, always it will be there. In the given context, such situation, many times it prevails. But what is the coping strategy we choose matters, both in men's mental health as well as women's mental health.
Thank you, sir. With this, we will conclude today's session, sir. On the behalf of the team at NIMHANS, Center for Violence Against Women and Mental Health, we thank Dr. E. Arvind Raj for discussing such an important topic today. We believe this discussion brings an insight onto all of us. Thank you, sir. We thank our mentor, our project lead, Dr. Prabha Chandra, for her support. We thank Government of Karnataka, Department of Women and Child Development for funding the project. We thank NIMHANS Digital Academy for helping us hosting this webinar. We thank Dr. Rashmi Arsappa. Ma'am is here today with us, co-investigator of the project, for her persistent support. We thank all the participants for today's webinar. We will meet again in the next month for the topic alcoholism and gender-based violence. Thank you, sir. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you very much. Thank you.